The road into Harlan County did not ease you in gently. It dropped you into it all at once, the way the mountains decided things in eastern Kentucky, without negotiation, without warning, with a finality that made argument seem beside the point. The peaks came up fast on both sides of the two-lane blacktop, rising steep and close enough that the sky above felt rationed, a thin strip of pale October blue wedged between ridgelines that had been standing since before this country had a name or a flag or a courthouse. Dorothy Briggs had driven that road 10,000 times in 67 years, and she still felt the particular pull in her chest every single time the valley opened, and the old farmhouse came into view on its gentle rise above the creek. White clapboard siding gone gray at the edges, a tin roof that rang like a drum in the summer storms. A front porch with two rocking chairs that had been there so long they had sunk permanent, shallow grooves into the floorboards. 40 acres of Kentucky land wrapped around the house like a pair of arms. Hers. All of it hers. She had been born in the back bedroom of that house on a February morning 67 years ago, in a difficult birth that her mother had described to her once and never again. Her father had paced the porch. The midwife had been steady and certain, and Dorothy had taken that steadiness in with her first breath and never put it down. Her mother had tended that land for 30 years. Her father had bought the first 20 acres after the war, paid cash money he had saved over 7 years of loading coal at the Consol mine 3 counties over, because he wanted something that no man could take a percentage of. He had added the second 20 the year Dorothy was born, buying them from a neighbor who was leaving for Cincinnati and never coming back. Her father had said once that he bought the land not because he expected to become rich from it, but because he wanted something real. He had said money disappears, but land is still there in the morning. Dorothy had believed him then. She believed him still. Her mother had died on that land in the same back bedroom at 81, with the window open and the sound of the creek coming in on the spring air. Her husband Ray had taken his last breath in the east-facing bedroom 9 years ago, holding her hand while the morning light came through the curtains and turned everything the color of old honey. Ray had farmed the land for 30 years and worked it even when the back gave out in 2007 and the doctor told him to stop. And he had worked it with a quieter kind of movement after that, the way men who love what they do find ways to keep doing it. He had died on a Tuesday in late March, and Dorothy had grieved him properly, which meant she had taken the time she needed and not a day more. And then she had gotten up and kept the land. She was 67 years old, and she was not a woman given to self-pity. She had the hands of someone who had spent 40 years as a registered nurse at Harlan County General, strong, quick, careful hands that had started IVs in moving ambulances and pressed hard on wounds in the acute bay without flinching. Hands that had held people's hands while they were dying and had held people's heads while they were vomiting, and had done both of those things in the same shift and gone back to work. Retirement had not softened her hands. She still split firewood herself when the stack ran low, refusing the gas furnace except in the coldest weeks. She still drove the old tractor through the lower field every spring and turned the soil herself because the turning was good for her and good for the land, and she liked the smell of it. She kept a garden the size of a small park behind the house and put up enough jars every August to see her through the deepest winter Kentucky could produce. She had done most of this alone for the past 9 years, or nearly alone. There was Owen. Owen Ray Briggs was 6 years old and had his grandfather's name for a middle name, and his grandfather's eyes, deep brown and steady, the kind of eyes that looked at things directly and held what they saw. He had been in Dorothy's care for 14 months, which was long enough that the farm had become his home in the genuine sense. The sense where a place shapes a child's understanding of what a home is. He was her son, Warren's boy. Dorothy tried not to hold that against him, because Warren's failures were not Owen's burden, and she believed firmly that children should not be made to carry the sins of the parents who made them. Owen's mother, Lily, had finally left Warren after the 3rd hospitalization, the 2nd protective order, and a night in December when Warren had put his fist through the kitchen wall 6 inches from Owen's head. Lily had done what she should have done earlier, and Dorothy did not judge her for the earlier part, because she understood how those situations worked. How you stayed, not because you were weak, but because every time you thought about leaving, there was a reason it would be better next week, and next week never came. Until suddenly it did, and you left, all at once. Lily was in Harlan proper now, working 2 jobs at once, coming to the farm on her days off to be with her son, building herself back slowly and carefully. Dorothy kept the door open for Lily and kept it closed for Warren, and she did not explain this to anyone because it did not require explaining. Warren Briggs was 44 years old and had been breaking things since he was 16. Not just furniture, not just promises, though there had been plenty of both over the years. He broke the law periodically and without apparent remorse. He broke the people who made the mistake of trusting him. He had served 2 prior stretches in the Kentucky State Correctional System before the 11-month sentence that had just ended 8 months for assault, 14 months for receiving stolen property. And he had emerged from each of those terms, not reformed, but refined the rougher edges of his cruelty, ground down and sharpened into something more efficient. Dorothy had loved her son with the particular ferocity of a mother who cannot stop loving, regardless of what the evidence demands. She had stopped enabling him long before that, and she had stopped being surprised by him not long after. He had been released 3 days before the October morning when everything began to shift. She had not heard from him directly. She had heard about him, which was different and worse. Mabel Hendricks at the feed store had seen him at the Quick Stop on Route 7, looking thin and wired, talking too loud. Curtis Weaver, who leased her back 10 acres for hay and had done so reliably for 6 years, had seen Warren's car parked outside the county courthouse for most of a Tuesday morning, which was notable because Warren had no legitimate business at the courthouse. Dorothy noted these things the way she noted changes in the weather, carefully, without panic, without pretending she did not see what she saw. On the Thursday morning that things began to come apart, she was in the garden, checking the last of the tomato cages for the season, when Owen came running out the back door in his socks, which he was not supposed to wear outside, holding a piece of paper in both hands. The way children hold things they have understood, even without reading them, are important. A man came to the door, Owen said. He had a uniform. Dorothy straightened from the cages and wiped her hands on her work pants and took the paper from him the way she had once taken lab results from doctors in hospital corridors, carefully, without reaction, saving the reaction for when she was alone with it. She read it twice. It was a summons. Warren Briggs' plaintiff had filed a petition for modification of custody and visitation rights regarding Owen Ray Briggs Minor. The hearing date was set for 31 days out in Harlan County Family Court. The presiding judge was listed as the Honorable Floyd Keller. Dorothy folded the paper along its original crease. She told Owen to put his shoes on and go check on the chickens. She waited until his small boots had thumped around the corner of the house before she sat down on the back steps and read the summons a third time. Floyd Keller had been on the family court bench in Harlan County for 11 years. He was known in the county as a man who made decisions without apparent friction, which in Dorothy's long experience could mean either that he was fair or that he had already decided before you walked in. She had no particular feeling about Keller either way. She had treated his wife in the emergency room once, years ago, a fall that turned out to be nothing, and she remembered almost nothing about the encounter. She had no particular feeling about him now, except that the coincidence of Warren filing legal papers 3 days out of prison with a hearing date assigned to a specific judge made the skin at the back of her neck tighten in the way it tightened when something was wrong that she could not yet name. She called Roy Carver, who had handled Ray's estate and her property taxes and a fence dispute in 2019. Roy was nearly retired and honest with her. Inside 30 seconds, he could not take a custody case. She would need a family court attorney. He gave her two names, both in Lexington, both expensive. Dorothy thanked him and sat in the kitchen for exactly 1 minute, letting the full weight of what was in front of her settle onto her shoulders. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, Owen's boots on the porch boards above the sound of the chickens. Then she stood up and went back out to finish the tomato cages. That evening, she called Lily. The conversation was short and honest the way conversations between two people who care about the same child tend to be. Lily cried briefly and then stopped and asked practical questions. Dorothy answered what she could. They agreed that Owen could not find out yet, not until there was something certain to tell him, and that they would figure it out together. Dorothy did not sleep well. She lay in the bed she had shared with Ray for 31 years and looked at the ceiling and thought about the land. Her father had bought the first 20 acres with 7 years of coal money. He had told her that he wanted something that couldn't be taken. He had been wrong about that, she thought. Things could always be taken. You just had to find the right mechanism. She fell asleep at 3 and dreamed nothing she could remember. The following morning, she took Owen to school in the old Dodge pickup with the cracked dashboard and the AM radio that got 2 stations clearly. Owen ate a biscuit in the passenger seat and told her about a book he was reading, something about a boy and a dog, and Dorothy listened and drove and let herself be taken out of her own head for the 12 minutes it took to reach Ridgewood Elementary when she was not pushing the speed. She dropped him at the curb. He jumped down with his backpack and his lunch pail and turned back with the sudden seriousness that came over him sometimes, the expression that was entirely Ray. "I love you, Grandma Dot," he said. "I love you too, Bug," she said. "Go on." She watched him walk through the school doors. Then she pulled out of the lot and pointed the truck toward town for her errands: feed store, hardware store, pharmacy, for her blood pressure prescription. She did them in order and efficiently, and at the hardware store, Earl Boone told her he had seen Warren driving on County Road 12 that morning, heading south in a car Earl did not recognize. Dorothy thanked him, paid for her screws, and went to the pharmacy. She was on Route 7, heading home 5 miles out of town when the truck made the sound. A wet, grinding sound from underneath, rhythmic, and then not rhythmic, and then the steering wheel went heavy in her hands, and the truck drifted right without her asking it to. She had enough experience with bad things happening quickly that she steered into the drift and got the truck onto the gravel shoulder before it could decide for her. She got out and walked around to the right front and found what she expected: the tire not just flat, but catastrophically, so the sidewall split clean through the rim, sitting on the gravel with a finality that ruled out any quick solution. She stood on the shoulder of Route 7 in the October morning, the mountains rising on both sides, the air sharp with cold creek water and fallen leaves. She had a spare under the truck bed. She had changed tires before. She was also 67 years old, and the lug nuts had been on since Ray's time. And the afternoon was getting cold, and the odds of getting them loose without the right leverage were not in her favor. She got her phone out. 2 bars. She tried Lily, who was at work. She tried Curtis Weaver, who did not pick up. She was looking for Roy Carver's number when she felt it, before she heard it, a low pressure in her sternum, a sound that was more vibration than sound, building from the south. She looked up. They came around the curve in a column that stretched back farther than she could see clearly. Motorcycles, a long formation of them moving at highway speed, their sound building from felt to unmistakable. Heavy American iron chrome catching the October light, the particular rolling thunder of many machines moving in formation. As the column reached her, it slowed. The lead rider moved to the shoulder ahead of her truck. The others reduced their speed and peeled off behind him in pairs, engines dropping to an idle, and then cutting the sound, dying bike by bike, until the October morning was quiet again. The lead rider swung off his machine. He was tall in the way that was not fat tall, but wide tall, a man who took up the space he occupied without announcement. He wore a leather cut over a dark thermal shirt, his arms showing the kind of muscle that came from physical work over years, rather than from a gym. The cut had a patch on the back. His face was 40-something and weathered and specific, with a jaw that had been set wrong once and healed that way, and a beard going gray at the chin. He pulled off his sunglasses and hung them from his collar, and his eyes, when she could see them clearly, were pale green. He walked toward her with the measured pace of a man approaching something he wants to be certain of first. He stopped 8 feet from her. He looked at her face. Something happened in his expression that was not quite recognition in the ordinary sense, but something more like the completion of a long calculation. "Mrs. Briggs," he said. His voice was quiet and a little rough, a voice that was not wasted. "Dorothy Briggs." She looked at him carefully. 40-something, pale green eyes. The particular quality of stillness that she had seen in patients who had been near death and returned from it, a quality of having been reorganized by that proximity into something more deliberate than they had been before. She had seen it many times in her career. She had seen it once with a special clarity on a summer night 20 years ago, on this same road, in a young man who had gone off his motorcycle in the drainage ditch at the curve 60 yards south of where she was standing, his chest open and his pulse barely there when she knelt beside him. She had been driving home from a double shift. She had stopped. She had done what could be done with her medical bag in her hands until the ambulance came, and she had ridden with him in the ambulance because he was alone, and she would not leave someone alone in that circumstance. And she had sat in the waiting room until the surgeon came out and told her he was stable. She had left before he woke because she needed to get home to Ray, who was already sick by then and who she never liked leaving overnight. She had known the young man's name from the license in his wallet, which she had checked for next of kin information. "Cash Donovan." "Cash," she said. He nodded once. Something moved through his face that he did not try to contain. 20 years, near enough, he said. "Yes." He looked at the tire. They had tools. 2 of his men came forward without being told and worked the lug wrench while Cash stood on the shoulder with Dorothy and looked at the road. "You look like you're carrying something," he said. She almost deflected it. She was very good at deflecting things. Instead, she said, "I got served with papers 3 days ago. My son Warren, he's filing for custody of my grandson. He just got out of prison." Cash did not react visibly. He listened. "The judge assigned to the case is Floyd Keller," she said. Something shifted in his face at the name. A small tightening, controlled and released. "You know that name," she said. "I know the county." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you have a lawyer?" "I can't afford one for this. Not the kind I'd need." He reached into his cut and produced a card name and phone number, nothing else. He held it out and she took it. "That's my personal number," he said. "Not the club line. I want you to call me if this gets hard. I mean that. You don't owe me anything, Cash." "No," he said quietly and very precisely. "You didn't just stop. Stopping was what anyone would do. You stayed." The men finished the tire. They dropped the bad one into the bed and closed the tailgate. The young one with the scar through his eyebrow touched his ball cap at her. Cash walked her to the driver's side door and told her not to trust the spare past 50 and to get it replaced before she went anywhere else. "I know how tires work," she said, the ghost of a smile. "Yes, ma'am, I expect you do." She drove home. She made Owen's after-school snack and set it on the counter. She sat at the kitchen table with the card and turned it over once and put it in the drawer next to the summons. She did not call him that day. She waited a week because that was how long she could afford to wait before the situation required it. The week was not quiet. On Monday, Curtis Weaver told her he had seen Warren with Keller's court clerk at a diner in town. Not illegal, not individually notable, but notable in the grammar of Harlan County, where who ate with who carried meaning. On Wednesday, she received a call from a paralegal at a Lexington firm, one of the 2 names Roy had given her, the expensive one, informing her that Warren had retained their representation. Dorothy thanked the woman and hung up and stood in her kitchen for a while. Warren had no money. Warren had been in prison for 11 months. Warren could not pay a Lexington firm. Someone was paying for it. On Friday, a car she did not recognize drove slowly past the end of her driveway, slowed nearly to a stop, and drove on. It happened again that afternoon in a different car with the same deliberateness. Dorothy wrote down both plates in the small notebook she kept in the kitchen junk drawer because 40 years in emergency medicine had made documentation as natural to her as breathing. On Saturday, she took Owen to Lily's apartment in town. On the way back, she stopped at the hardware store and found Earl Boone in a state of visible agitation. He told her in the low, urgent tone that carried real news in small towns that Floyd Keller had pushed through an expedited mining survey permit for a parcel of land on the southeast edge of the county. The parcel was referenced by legal description, a series of coordinates rather than an owner name. Earl's cousin at the county assessor's office had matched the coordinates to a deed. The parcel was 40 acres, running east from Briggs Creek. Dorothy drove home. She sat in the driveway for a moment with the engine running. Then she went inside and took Cash Donovan's card out of the kitchen drawer and called the number. He answered on the second ring. No greeting, just his name. Cash, she said. This is Dorothy Briggs. I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen. Yes, ma'am, he said. Go ahead. She told him everything in the careful, sequential way she had given patient histories and handoff facts, in order, nothing omitted, nothing embellished. The summons, Keller's assignment, Warren's sudden legal representation, the slow cars, the mining permit coordinates matched to her 40 acres. When she finished, there was a short silence. Mrs. Briggs Cash said, when is the last time you locked your doors at night? I've always locked my doors. From now on, check them twice. Are you home now? Yes. Is the boy there? He's in his room. I'm going to make some calls, Cash said. Can you be reachable tomorrow? I'll be here all day. A pause. Then he told her what she had done for him on that summer road 20 years ago. He said she had not just kept him breathing. He said he had been riding away from something that night, not being careful because he did not much care whether he was careful, and that her stopping had changed something in how he thought about whether his life was worth the trouble. He said he had thought about her over the years and about how to repay it, and had never found a way that was not insulting. Maybe now I know, he said. Just make your calls, she told him. He came the next morning, alone on the black bike with the red stripe on the tank. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment before swinging off. Dorothy met him on the porch with coffee, which he took with both hands and held rather than drank. He looked at the house. He looked at the land, the garden going quiet for the season, the fields brown and patient, the creek through the trees below. He looked at the mountains. This is a good piece of land, he said. Yes, she said. Ray built this. We built it together. He looked at her. How many people do you have looking at this? Right now, me 6 riders, Rebecca and her investigator. He paused. I'm adding more. I want 2 people tracking Keller and 2 on Warren's movements every day. That's a lot of people for one old woman's problem. Cash looked at her. You are not one old woman, he said. You're the person who decided my life was worth saving when I had already decided it wasn't. Everything I've done since that night is because of that decision you made in 3 seconds on a dark road. He looked back at the mountains. And you're Dorothy Briggs, and you're not losing this land, and Owen is not going anywhere. He said it the way she had once told a mother in the intensive care unit that her son was going to make it, with the weight of someone who had decided something rather than guessed it. Rebecca Gallagher had called the previous afternoon while Cash was on the road. She was a legal advocate out of Lexington who worked civil rights and judicial misconduct cases. Her voice was direct and low and unhurried, the voice of someone who had learned that rushing people made them hear you less rather than more. She told Dorothy she had been watching Floyd Keller for 3 years. Not personally watching, professionally. She had represented 2 families in Harlan County who had lost property under circumstances that did not, upon close examination, bear close examination. In both cases, expedited survey permits had preceded legal proceedings. In both cases, the legal proceedings had involved children, custody disputes, guardianship challenges, juvenile court proceedings that turned on the fitness of a parent or grandparent to maintain a home. In both cases, the families had eventually sold. In both cases, the buyer was a shell company out of Lexington that traced painstakingly to a holding company called Ridgeline Resource Partners. Ridgeline acquired mineral rights and subsurface extraction leases in eastern Kentucky. They had a working relationship with a development arm of a much larger energy company. They had been very active in Harlan County in the past 5 years. "I believe Keller is part of it," Rebecca said. "I don't have enough to prove it yet. But what Cash told me about your case fits the pattern in a way I cannot attribute to coincidence." "What do you need from me?" "Everything you have. Deeds, tax records, the survey, the permit number, and the notebook Cash says you're keeping." She paused. "I need you to hold on. The hearing is 31 days out, and I'm going to use every one of them." Dorothy sent the documents overnight to Rebecca's Lexington office. She drove to the mail office in town and paid the fee, and drove home on the river road the way she sometimes drove when she did not want to be inside yet. Warren came the following Tuesday night, past 9, Owen asleep. Dorothy at the kitchen table with the land documents spread in front of her, going through the deeds and tax receipts and the survey from 1987 with her reading glasses on. She heard the car first, coming down the gravel drive too fast, braking hard, the announcement of itself as a threat. She took off her reading glasses. She did not move toward the door. He knocked once, hard, then tried the handle. The door was locked. He hit it again and again, and on the third hit the old lock gave with a sound like something deciding to break. Warren came in the way he always came into rooms, too much of him, too fast. Prison had burned the last softness out of him. His face was her face, made into something harder and meaner. The family resemblance, a kind of insult. "Where is the boy?" "Asleep." "I want to see him." "You are not going to wake him at 9:15. Warren moved to the table. Dorothy did not stand. She looked at him with the same level attention she had given to agitated patients in the acute bay present. Watchful, not showing fear because showing fear to a certain kind of person was itself an act of escalation. "I'm going to win that hearing," Warren said. He put both hands on the table and leaned forward. His breath smelled of cigarettes and something medicinal. "Keller is going to give me the boy, and you are going to sign over the land, and this is going to be over." "Sit down, Warren." "I don't want to sit down." "Then stand there." "But listen." Dorothy set her glasses carefully on the table. "I know about the mining permit. I know Keller signed it for a company that wants what is under my 40 acres. I know someone paid your legal fees. I don't have all the details yet, but I'm working on them." She looked at him. "You don't want to do this." Something moved across Warren's face, not conscience exactly, but something adjacent to it, a flicker of what he might have been if different choices had been made at different times. It lasted less than a second. "You got nothing," he said. "I have 31 years of paying my property taxes on time. I have a dead husband who worked this land until his back gave out and worked it some more after that. I have a grandson who sleeps at the end of this hall and has never once been afraid of anything inside this house." She paused. "And I have people looking into Floyd Keller right now who know what to do with what they find." Warren's eyes went flat. "What people?" "You don't need to know their names." He straightened. He looked at the box of documents. For one moment, she tracked the distance to the iron skillet on the wall hook. He turned and walked back through the kitchen and out into the dark. She heard his car start and leave. She sat at the table for a while after the sound of it faded. Then she propped a chair under the broken door handle and went to Owen's room and stood in the doorway, listening to him breathe until her own heartbeat slowed. Then she went back to the table and picked up her reading glasses and went back to work. She did not know yet that she was not alone. 3 miles down Route 7, parked in the dark mouth of a logging road cut into the hillside, 2 motorcycles sat with their engines cold. The 2 men on them had been there for 2 hours. They had watched Warren's car arrive and watched it leave. One of them sent a text that said simply, "He came, left clean. She is okay." The reply came back in under a minute. "Stay put till morning." The 2 men settled back into the dark and waited, because Cash Donovan had asked them to, and because Dorothy Briggs had kept one of their own breathing on this same road 20 years ago. The freeze came in the second week of November, dropping overnight without gradation, leaving the ground hard by morning and the creek skinned over at the edges. Dorothy checked the pipes before light and found them fine, and stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the house adjust to the cold, the contracting walls, the settling roof, the particular language of an old structure and weather. She knew every sound this house made. She could tell a normal sound from a warning. Everything was normal. The house was fine because she had taken care of it. She made coffee and waited for the light. The hearing date was 11 days away when Rebecca called with news of Keller's clerk, the unofficial inquiry, the blink. Keller was offering a continuance in exchange for Owen's temporary return to Dorothy's care. Dorothy heard this and sat with it for the day. By evening, she had understood it. Keller was cornered. Not finished, but cornered, which was in some ways more dangerous. Cornered men accelerated. They improvised. She needed to be ready for whatever came next. She called Cash. She told him about the clerk's inquiry. "What do you need?" he said. "I need to know the 49 are still coming on the hearing day." "They are coming," he said, without hesitation. "And I need you to understand that whatever Keller tries in these last days, we do not react with anything that gives him a reason to reframe this. 49 riders outside a courthouse is powerful because it is entirely legal. The moment it looks like a threat rather than a presence, Keller gets to call himself the victim, and we lose the story." A pause. "You are right to say it, and you are right that they know it, but I will say it again to the whole group this week." She slept better than she had in weeks. The week that followed moved in the specific rhythm of waiting with purpose, which was different from waiting without it. Dorothy kept Owen's routine with the precision of someone who understood that routine was its own kind of safety for a child. She drove him to school herself rather than the bus. She was at the pickup line 15 minutes early every afternoon. She did not tell him about the federal inquiry that Rebecca had mentioned was moving faster than expected, or about the 2 additional riders Cash had stationed in the logging road. She told him when he asked one morning, with those steady brown eyes, that things were moving in the right direction. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because I have been doing this a long time," she said. "I know what moving in the right direction feels like." He ate his eggs and accepted this. The recusal motion landed in the circuit court on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, word of it had moved through the Harlan County Courthouse the way all real news moved through small courthouses, not by announcement, but by the quality of silence that falls when something has happened that changes everything, and everyone is pretending it has not. Rebecca called Dorothy on Monday morning to tell her the motion was filed and that Keller would be formally notified that day. She said it the way a surgeon said, "We opened, it was done, and now the question was, what came next?" What came next was 3 days of nothing visible. On the 3rd day, Rebecca called again with the controlled urgency of someone whose voice had shifted registers. Keller had denied the recusal motion. "He ruled on his own recusal," Dorothy said. "Yes. Is that permitted?" "It is procedurally allowed in this jurisdiction. He is the assigned judge, the motion was filed in his court, and he has authority to rule on it himself, unless it goes to the circuit level, which requires additional grounds." She paused. "We are filing the circuit appeal today, but the appeal is unlikely to be resolved before the hearing. So we go before Keller. Unless the circuit court acts very quickly, yes." Dorothy thought about Sandra Pierce, the caseworker, who had come to the farm. "My report goes through a supervisor, and I cannot guarantee how it is processed from there." She thought about Warren in her kitchen. She thought about the cars on the road. "What is your honest read?" she said. "Keller is going to try to move fast," Rebecca said. "He knows we have something. He knows the appeal is in flight. He is going to want this resolved before it can be stopped. He may push for a temporary removal order before the hearing, preemptive, based on the CPS complaint." Sandra Pierce said she would recommend no intervention. "I know, but her supervisor did not say that." Dorothy looked out the window at the frozen yard, the frozen garden, the mountains white at their peaks. "What do I do?" she said. "You let me do my job," Rebecca said. "And you call Cash because we need everyone we have right now." Dorothy called Cash. He answered on the first ring. Keller denied the recusal, she said. I know, he said. Rebecca's investigator copied me an hour ago. He paused. We found something this morning. Ridgeline Resource Partners transferred $60,000 to a legal defense fund trust in Warren's name 6 weeks before he was released from prison. The transfer was routed through 2 holding accounts, but the forensic accountant traced it back. They paid for his lawyer before he even got out, before he filed anything. They had this planned before he came home. That is a bribe, Dorothy said. It is more than a bribe. It is conspiracy. It potentially implicates Keller Ridgeline, whoever funds Ridgeline and Warren. Rebecca has the documentation. She is deciding how to deploy it. She should send it to the federal level, Dorothy said. State judicial oversight is too slow and too entangled with county politics. Rebecca said the same thing this morning. He paused. You think like a tactician. I think like a nurse who has dealt with hospital administrators, she said. It is the same skill. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. I am coming to Harlan this afternoon. I am bringing 6 riders. He came and Dorothy fed them all in the kitchen because that was what you did. She made beef stew and cornbread and a pie from the last of the fall apples. And the men ate with the careful, polite seriousness of people who understood they were guests in a place that mattered. They did not take up too much space. They put their plates in the sink. The young one with the scar through his left eyebrow, Finn Roth, helped her dry the dishes without being asked. After dinner, Cash spread a hand-drawn map of the courthouse square on the kitchen table. He showed her where 49 riders would be positioned on the hearing day. He showed her the angles visible from the main entrance, visible from the ground floor windows of courtroom 2, where Keller presided. Not blocking anything, not threatening anyone, just present, just visible. The law does not have to be afraid of us, Cash said, but it needs to know we are watching. Keller will know we have the evidence before the hearing, Dorothy said. Rebecca is going to send him formal notice that we intend to present it. Cash nodded. That is the plan. He might fold, Dorothy said. Cash looked at the map. Men like Keller fold when the cost of not folding gets too high. Right now the cost is low. We need to raise it. Rebecca is raising it from the legal side. We are raising it from the visibility side. And the federal referral is raising it from a direction he cannot influence. 3 directions, Dorothy said. 3 directions, he confirmed. She stood on the porch after they left and watched the lights of their bikes move down the drive and onto Route 7 and disappear around the curve. She could hear the sound of them for a long time after the lights were gone, rolling away through the mountains. And then the night was quiet, and she was alone with the land and the stars and the cold. On the following Tuesday, 11 days before the hearing, a county vehicle pulled up to Ridgewood Elementary at 2:45 in the afternoon. Dorothy was not in the pickup line. She had been running 5 minutes late a stuck gate on the north fence that had taken longer than expected, and she was on Route 7 doing 50 when her phone rang. It was the school secretary, and her voice had the particular quality of controlled distress that Dorothy recognized from 20 years of emergency nursing. They had taken Owen, not violently, not in a way that would constitute a scene in front of the other children. 2 people from the county had presented a temporary emergency protective order signed by Floyd Keller, alleging imminent risk to a minor in the care of Dorothy Briggs, based on the outstanding CPS complaint. Owen had been taken to the county facility in Harlan. He was not hurt. He was, the secretary said with careful understatement, very upset. Dorothy pulled over. She sat on the shoulder of Route 7, her hands on the wheel. She allowed herself 30 seconds to feel what she was feeling. Then she put the truck in gear and drove. She called Rebecca from the truck. Rebecca listened, and when Dorothy finished, she was already talking the temporary order, its legal basis, its vulnerabilities, the motion to vacate she would have filed within the hour. The need for Dorothy to go to the facility and confirm Owen was physically safe. She said one more thing. Dorothy, this is Keller panicking. This is a man who knows we have something and is trying to change the ground before the hearing. Panicking, men make mistakes. He has my grandson, Dorothy said. A brief pause. I know. I am going to get him back. Dorothy went to the county facility. She went inside and identified herself and was taken to a small room with plastic chairs and a laminate table and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. Owen was sitting in one of the chairs with a coloring book he was not coloring in. When Dorothy came through the door, he stood and walked to her with the measured dignity of a child who had been very frightened and had decided not to show it, and she took him in both arms and held him. I knew you would come, he said into her shoulder. Of course, she said. They said I have to stay here tonight. She pulled back and looked at his face. Composed, dry-eyed, Ray's face 60 years earlier. That's right. Just for tonight, maybe a couple of nights. I am working on it. Are the bikers fighting too? Owen asked. Dorothy stilled. What do you know about bikers? I saw them from my window at night. 2 of them. At the end of the driveway, he looked at her with those steady brown eyes. They were watching the house. To keep us safe. Like security guards on motorcycles. Dorothy looked at her grandson, 6 years old, watching from his window in the dark, putting it together by himself, and not afraid. Yes, she said, like that. Owen nodded and picked up his coloring book because he was 6 and life had to go on. Dorothy sat beside him and put her arm around his small shoulders, and they sat together in the plastic chairs in the county facility, while outside the October afternoon went on toward evening. She stayed 3 hours until the facility closed to visitors. She drove home alone for the first time in 14 months to a house that was very quiet. She made dinner for one and ate it at the kitchen table, and she did not cry. She called Cash and told him. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. I am going to need you to trust me for the next week, he said. I trust you, she said. They have 3 things happening at once, he told her. The appeal in the circuit court, Rebecca's motion to vacate the emergency order, and the federal referral, which is moving faster than we expected. Rebecca has a contact at the FBI field office in Lexington who is interested. He paused. And the hearing is still 11 days out. If we can get the order vacated before then, Owen comes home, Dorothy said. Owen comes home, he confirmed. She sat with the phone after she hung up. In the quiet house, the sound of the creek below the ridge in the distant highway, and the particular silence of a home missing the person who makes it not silent. She opened her notebook and wrote the next entry because the discipline of documentation was what would save them, if anything saved them, and she intended for it to save them. The following 4 days brought news in pieces the way bad situations gave up information reluctantly, incompletely with gaps that required nerve to hold through. Rebecca's motion to vacate was filed and sent to a circuit judge named Morrison out of Barberville, who Rebecca described as meticulous and fair and very slow. The federal referral moved faster. Rebecca's FBI contact an agent named Torres, who ran public corruption cases out of the Lexington field office, reviewed the financial documentation and immediately escalated it. 2 agents drove to Harlan County and spent a day at the county assessor's office. They interviewed Dorothy for 90 minutes, and she told them everything in the same methodical way she had told Rebecca, and the agents took notes and said very little, which she understood to mean that what she had brought was consistent with what they already suspected. On the Friday 7 days before the hearing, Rebecca called with something in her voice Dorothy had not heard before. A carefully controlled urgency. Keller's law clerk called my office this morning, Rebecca said. Unofficial inquiry. He asked whether we would consider a continuance of the hearing in exchange for a temporary release of Owen to your care, pending the rescheduled hearing. He is blinking, Dorothy said. He is blinking, Rebecca confirmed. My read is that someone told him about the federal activity. He is calculating how much they have. She paused. I told the clerk we would not accept a continuance, that we intend to appear at the hearing on the scheduled date with full documentation, and that we intend to present that documentation to the circuit court, the state judicial oversight board, and federal law enforcement, regardless of the outcome. How did the clerk respond? He said he would convey our position to the judge. She paused. Dorothy, we are close. Do not lose your nerve now. I have not lost it yet, Dorothy said. I do not intend to. Deputy Hank Cross came to the farm on Wednesday. He came in his county vehicle, in uniform. Dorothy watched him come up the drive from the kitchen window and went out to the porch before he could knock, because she intended to meet him on her own terms and on her own ground. Cross was 40, with the face of a man whose body had begun to record his bad decisions. He held his hat in his hands when he climbed the porch steps, which surprised her. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, "I need to talk to you." "Then talk." He looked down at the hat. "I signed the incident report that supported the CPS complaint," he said. "Keller asked me to. He said it was a formality. He said it was just to establish grounds for the hearing, that the order would be temporary." He paused. "I did not know they were going to take the boy." "You signed a false report." "Yes, and you are telling me this now. I found out yesterday that federal agents are asking questions. And because my brother Dennis told me last night what Warren said to him about what Keller promised Warren when all this was over." Cross looked up from the hat. "Keller told Warren he would get a share of the extraction proceeds from the land. This was never about giving Warren custody of the boy. The boy was leverage. The land was always the point." Dorothy held his gaze. "Will you say that in court?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I will say it to the FBI. I already called the number on one of their cards this morning. I am meeting with an agent tomorrow." He paused. "I do not know if that helps you for Thursday." "Tell Rebecca," Dorothy said. She held out her phone with the number already on the screen. "Right now, from here." He took the phone. He made the call. Dorothy listened from 3 feet away as Cross told Rebecca what he had told her. And Rebecca's voice on the other end was controlled and focused. And when she finished, she told Cross to stay available, that she needed a written statement that day. Cross handed back the phone. He looked like a man who had set down something very heavy and was not yet sure whether he felt better or worse. "I am sorry about the boy," he said. "I want you to know that." Dorothy looked at him. She was not a woman who wasted forgiveness on people who had not yet done the work to earn it. But she was not a woman who turned away from someone doing the right thing when it cost them. "Tell the truth to the FBI," she said. "Everything. And then we will talk about sorry." He nodded and drove away. She stood on the porch in the cold November air for a moment. Then she called Cash. "Cross just came to the farm," she said. "He is going to cooperate." A silence. "That changes things." "Yes," she said. "That could end this before Thursday." "It should end this before Thursday. Whether it does depends on how fast the FBI moves and whether Keller still thinks he can get ahead of it." "He cannot," Cash said. "He just does not know that yet." Thursday came on a gray November morning that felt appropriate, not gloomy, just serious. The mountains wrapped in low cloud, the air cold and very still. Dorothy drove to Barberville and arrived at Judge Morrison's circuit court 20 minutes early. Rebecca was already at the plaintiff's table with 2 thick binders and the particular composure that was really a controlled intensity. Warren was not present. His attorney Tillman was present, and his demeanor had shifted noticeably from the aggressive confidence Rebecca had described from the initial filings to something that looked like a man calculating his exit. Cross's statement had been delivered to Rebecca the previous evening. Torres at the FBI had confirmed federal agents would be available if Morrison requested cooperation. The Ridgeline financial documentation was in both binders and had been sent to Morrison's clerk 24 hours in advance. Morrison herself was 62, gray-haired with glasses she wore at the end of her nose and eyes that moved quickly and missed nothing. She ran a tight courtroom. She had read the briefs. She called the hearing to order at 9, and by 9:45 she had heard enough. She was not loud about it. She did not perform outrage. She looked at Tillman over her glasses and asked him a series of questions about the Ridgeline transfer, about the timing of Warren's legal representation relative to his release date, and about the process by which Cross had signed the incident report. Tillman answered what he could and stumbled badly on what he could not, which was most of it. Morrison set down her glasses. She looked at the room. The emergency protective order entered by Judge Floyd Keller in this matter was obtained on the basis of a CPS complaint, which the evidence before me suggests was supported by a fraudulently obtained incident report filed in the context of a broader scheme involving the improper use of judicial authority for financial gain, she said. I am vacating the order effective immediately. I am ordering the immediate return of the minor, Owen Ray Briggs, to the care of Dorothy Briggs, and I am ordering the Keller family court proceeding transferred to my court pending review. She picked up her pen. Furthermore, I am referring the totality of the financial documentation in this proceeding to the State Judicial Oversight Commission and to the FBI field office in Lexington, with a note that I understand they are already in receipt of related materials. She looked up. Is there anything else before I sign? No, Your Honor, Rebecca said. Then we are done here. Dorothy sat very still for one moment. Rebecca placed her hand over Dorothy's hand on the table. Go get Owen, Rebecca said quietly. Dorothy drove to Harlan. She went into the county facility and told the front desk what had happened, and the woman at the desk made a call and then walked Dorothy back down the hall to the room with the plastic chairs and the laminate table. Owen was sitting in one of the chairs playing cards with a serious-faced 7-year-old girl named Clara. He looked up when Dorothy came through the door. He stood up. He looked at her face. We are going home, Dorothy said. Owen picked up his backpack and his drawing pad and said goodbye to Clara with the solemnity of a child who understood something about what it meant to leave people behind. Then he walked out with his grandmother. They got in the truck. Dorothy drove home on Route 7 through the gray November morning with the mountains on both sides and the creek running high from the week's rain. She kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road. Owen sat beside her with his backpack on his lap and said nothing. The silence between them was one of the most complete and entire silences Dorothy Briggs had ever sat inside. At the bottom of the drive, she stopped. 2 motorcycles were parked at the shoulder, Finn Roth and one other. Finn touched his ball cap when Dorothy rolled down the window. It is over, she said. Finn smiled. He had a good smile for such a serious face. Yes, ma'am. Owen leaned across his grandmother. Are you Cash's people? We are. I made him a drawing, Owen said. For Cash. He is going to get it when he comes. He will be glad to hear it, Finn said. Dorothy rolled up the window. She turned up the drive. She pulled in front of the white clapboard house with its tin roof and its porch with the 2 rocking chairs and put the truck in park. Home, Owen said. Home, she confirmed. They went inside. She made lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup from the jar, which was Owen's specific request because he had been away 9 days and he wanted the ordinary goodness of his grandmother's kitchen. Dorothy made it without comment and served it and sat across from him and watched him eat with the focused intensity of a child reunited with something he had been kept from. He ate the whole bowl. He drank 2 glasses of milk. After lunch, he went to his room. Dorothy stood in the doorway and watched him set down his backpack and look around at his books, his toys, his bed with the blue quilt, the drawings she had taped to his wall the first week she had him. He looked at all of it with the expression of a child taking inventory of the things that matter. Then he sat on the floor and started building with his blocks. Dorothy went to the kitchen and called Rebecca. Morrison's order is official, Rebecca said. Keller has been asked by the State Judicial Oversight Commission to suspend his duties pending investigation. He did not argue. The Ridgeline extraction permit has been suspended by the State Environmental Office pending review. Warren's attorney filed to withdraw this morning. What happens to Warren, Dorothy said. His custody petition is now in front of Morrison. He still has the nominal legal right to file for custody, but without Keller's promise and without the Ridgeline money, there is no advantage for him in pursuing it. A pause. He might walk away. There is, Owen, Dorothy said. Yes, Rebecca said carefully. There is, Owen. Dorothy thought about what that meant. About Warren, her son, the boy she had raised in this house, who had stood at this kitchen table and threatened her, who had been recruited and funded and set into motion like a tool by a corrupt judge for $60,000 and the promise of a share of mineral proceeds. about the particular wreckage of a person who had allowed himself to become that. And underneath that, the things she had not said to anyone, the grief of it. Not anger, grief. The grief of a mother who had watched her child make one ruinous choice after another for 30 years and had never, not once, stopped hoping that the next one would be different. Dorothy, Rebecca said, "Is there anything left you need to do today?" "No, rest. I will call if anything changes." "Thank you," Dorothy said, "for everything." "Thank Cash," Rebecca said. "He called me first. He told me who you were." "I will thank you both," Dorothy said. She called Cash. She told him what Rebecca had said. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted several seconds, and in it was the weight of everything, the month of watching and waiting. The 47 riders become 49. The evidence and motions and long nights at the kitchen table. And before all of that, a summer night 20 years ago on Route 7, and a young man in a ditch, and a decision made in 3 seconds. "Owen is home," Cash said. "Owen is home." "Good," he said quietly. "Good. I want to see you," she said. "All of you. The whole 49. Will you come to the farm?" "When?" "Give me 2 weeks. Let everything settle, then come." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We will come." 2 weeks passed in the way things settled after a long storm. Not dramatically, but gradually the levels dropping, the ground reappearing, the ordinary things becoming ordinary again. Dorothy fixed the fence posts. She put the garden properly to bed for winter. She drove Owen to school and picked him up and listened to his accounts of each day with the full attention of a woman who had been briefly afraid she might lose him. Warren did not come back. On the 14th day, Lily called to say that Warren had called her. Not to threaten. He had said he was leaving Harlan. He was going to try to get straight. He asked about Owen. Lily told him Owen was safe and well, and that was all Warren needed to know right now. Warren said, "Okay," and hung up. Dorothy listened to this and was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" Lily asked. "I think I have been waiting 30 years for Warren to try to get straight," Dorothy said. "I am going to choose to believe he means it, and I am going to hope that he does, and I am going to keep protecting Owen until there is a reason to do otherwise." "That is what I thought too," Lily said. "You are a good mother," Dorothy said. "I want you to know that." Lily was quiet. "You taught me what that looked like," she said. Dorothy set the phone down. She sat in the kitchen in the ordinary evening quiet and let herself feel what she was feeling, which was complicated and had grief and relief and love and exhaustion all at once, and did not resolve into any single thing, but was real and full and hers. Then she got up and started dinner because Owen would be hungry and the world went on. The morning of the gathering, she was up before first light, which was not unusual for her, but was on this morning not about habit. She lay awake for 20 minutes in the dark, listening to the house, and the land, and the creek below the ridge. And then she put on her robe and went to the kitchen and started the percolate. She had spent 3 days preparing. Not anxiously, but with the same focused, systematic attention she brought to everything that mattered. She had cleared the lower field for parking, pushed back the last of the tall, dead grass with the tractor, and laid down a gravel path from the gate. She had borrowed 6 folding tables from the church hall and set them up under the old sugar maple. She had cooked for 2 days pots of chili and white bean soup pans of cornbread and biscuits. A sheet cake with white frosting that Owen had insisted on decorating himself, applying the task with the concentrated seriousness he brought to his best drawings. Lily was coming. Rebecca was coming. Curtis Weaver and Earl Boone and Mabel Hendricks from the feed store. Sandra Pierce, the caseworker, had called the day of Morrison's ruling to say she was glad it had turned out right, and Dorothy had said, "Come to the farm in 2 weeks and bring your family." And 49 riders were coming. Owen came down the hall at 6:30 in his pajamas, his hair standing up, a look of barely contained anticipation on his face. "Are they coming today?" "Yes. Later this morning." "How many?" 49. He absorbed this. "That is a lot." "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at the drawing on the kitchen table, the one he had made at the county facility, which Dorothy had carefully kept the farmhouse, and the mountains, and the motorcycles at the end of the drive, and the small figures with their arms raised at the courthouse. He touched the edge of it. Today, he said, Cash comes today. He does. Owen went to get dressed. Lily arrived at 9, and she and Dorothy worked side by side in the kitchen for an hour, moving with the easy efficiency of two women who had long since figured out how to share a space productively. Rebecca Gallagher arrived at 10, a tall woman with short silver hair and a very direct manner that Dorothy had only encountered on the phone and recognized instantly in person. She looked at the farm, at the house, and the mountains, and the garden, gone quiet for winter, and the lower field with its gravel path and borrowed tables, and something moved through her face. This is what it was all about, Rebecca said. Yes, Dorothy said. It is worth it. Yes, it is. Earl and Curtis came together in Curtis's truck. Mabel arrived 5 minutes later. Sandra Pierce came with her husband and two teenage sons. Several others, neighbors, people from the church, people from the old days at the hospital. The lower field began to fill with the mixed and improbable company of Dorothy Briggs's life. Then, at 11 o'clock, they heard it. The sound came from the south, the way all the sounds from that direction came rolling around the curve of Route 7 and up through the valley. Low collective thunder building from felt to heard. Owen, who had been helping carry the heavy chili pot, stopped at the sound and turned toward the road. Dorothy watched him climb to the bottom rail of the fence and stand there looking south. They came around the curve in a column that stretched back farther than she could see. 49 motorcycles, heavy American iron, chrome and leather, and the particular sound that was not like any other sound in the world. The rolling, sequential thunder of many machines moving together in the November morning. The lead bike was black with a red stripe on the tank. The rider sat it with the forward level posture of a man completely at home in what he was doing. They turned off Route 7 onto her road and came up the drive in pairs, peeling off in orderly rows to either side of the gravel path, cutting engines in sequence so that the sound died bike by bike, each silence adding to the last until the final machine went quiet and the November morning was still. The stillness was enormous. Owen climbed down from the fence and stood in the field 20 yards from the column, looking at the riders with the expression of a child encountering something that was exactly as large and real as he had imagined it. Cash Donovan swung off his bike. He walked toward Dorothy with the same deliberate, unhurried pace, and the rest of the riders stayed with their machines and waited. Dorothy came down the porch steps. They met in the middle of the drive. "You came," she said. "We came," he said. She wanted to say something adequate to what was in front of her. She could not think of anything adequate. She had never been a woman who confused sentiment with sincerity. "Thank you," she said. "All of you." Cash nodded. He looked past her at Owen, who stood a few feet behind her, very still, the drawing rolled up carefully in both hands. "Is that him?" Cash said. "That's him," she said. Cash walked past her. He crouched down in front of Owen and looked at the boy. Owen looked back at him, those steady brown eyes looking at this man who had sat in the dark of a logging road 3 miles from the farm and watched and waited, who had called a lawyer and moved everything. "Are you Cash?" Owen asked. "I am." Owen held out the drawing. Cash took it with both hands and unrolled it carefully and looked at it for a long moment. The farmhouse, the mountains, the motorcycles at the end of the driveway, the small figures with their arms raised at the courthouse. "You made this," Cash said. "At the place where I was staying," Owen said. "I knew you were there. At the end of the driveway." He pointed at the motorcycles in the drawing. "Those are you and Finn." Cash looked at the drawing for another moment. His jaw was set in a way that was not hardness, but its opposite. "This is the best thing anyone has ever given me," he said. He said it to Owen directly, not performing it for the adults around him. Owen nodded, satisfied. Then he said, "Grandma Dot says you saved each other." Cash looked up at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Cash. "She did the saving first," Cash said. "She says you are even now." Cash was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and reached into the inside pocket of his cut and brought out a narrow silver bracelet, worn smooth with years, simple, without inscription. He held it out to Dorothy. She had not seen it in 20 years, not since she had tied it to the wrist of a young man in the back of an ambulance, because it was the only thing she had at hand, and she wanted him to have something to hold on to. I have carried it since that night, Cash said. I told you once I did not know how to repay you. I think I know now. He held it out. It goes back to you. Dorothy looked at the bracelet in his hand. She took it. She turned it over once in her fingers. Then she reached out and took Cash's hand, this big, weathered, careful hand, and she set the bracelet back in his palm and closed his fingers around it. You keep it, she said, not as a debt, as a reminder that you can do for someone else what I did for you. Cash looked at her. Something happened in his face that she had never seen on it before. He was 60 seconds from not being composed about it. She could see that clearly. Yes, ma'am, he said. From behind Cash, a voice called out, a big man with a white beard whom Dorothy did not know. You going to make us all stand around here all day, or are we going to eat? Laughter moved through the crowd, the easy, genuine kind that happened when tension broke correctly. Owen grinned. Lily laughed from the porch. Even Rebecca smiled. Dorothy turned to the crowd. Then let us eat, she said. What followed was one of the better afternoons of her long life. The lower field filled with a mixed, improbable company of 49 motorcycle riders and the neighbors of Harlan County, all of them at the borrowed tables under the sugar maple, with their bowls of chili and their cornbread and their coffee. The particular thing that happens when very different people are fed together at the same table happened. The awkward distance collapsed. The conversations started. The children ran around the adults' legs. Owen's drawing was passed around and admired by an embarrassing number of people, and Owen accepted the admiration with a becoming mixture of pride and studied nonchalance. Finn Roth found Dorothy in the kitchen while she was cutting the sheet cake and stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand. I just want you to know, ma'am, I was one of the two guys watching the road, both times the whole time. He paused. I just wanted you to know that. I know, Dorothy said. Owen figured it out. He drew you. Finn looked at her. Then he looked down at his hat. He is a good kid, he said. He is the best, Dorothy said. Would you like some cake? Rebecca found Dorothy near the end of the afternoon when the light was going golden and the field had thinned to a comfortable number of people. She stood beside Dorothy at the fence and looked out at the land. What is next for the case, Dorothy asked. Morrison has the custody proceeding. The federal case against Keller and Ridgeline will take months. You will be asked to give a deposition. The extraction permit stays suspended. Other families in the county who lost land, I am going to represent some of them. It does not undo what they lost, but it establishes a record. It matters, Dorothy said. Yes, Rebecca said. It does. Out in the field, Cash was sitting on an overturned bucket, talking to Owen, who was demonstrating something with two sticks that appeared to involve geometric precision. Cash was listening with genuine attention. He came back different than he left, Rebecca said. He came back knowing what he was building toward, Dorothy said. That is different from just moving. What do you do now? Dorothy looked at the land, at the mountains going dark at their peaks, while the lower slopes held the last of the afternoon gold. At the house with its tin roof and its porch and its new front door lock. At her garden dormant that would come back in the spring. Same thing I always do, Dorothy said. Get up early, work the land, keep Owen fed, fix what needs fixing. Rebecca looked at her. That is a good answer. It is the only answer I have, Dorothy said. The gathering wound down as gatherings did gradually in small departures. Neighbors said goodbye and drove off into the November evening. The riders remounted in clusters, the sound of engines starting rippling through the field in small waves. Cash was the last to leave. He stood by his bike in the drive while the last of the column pulled out, and Owen stood on the bottom porch step, watching him with the expression of a child trying to memorize something. Will you come back? Owen asked. Probably, Cash said, if your grandmother will have us. Owen looked at Dorothy. You are always welcome here, Dorothy said. Any of you. Cash swung onto the bike. He looked at Dorothy one last time, a long, steady look that carried everything they had been through in the past 6 weeks and the 20 years before it, and the particular weight of what it meant to be the person who stopped and the person who was stopped for. "Ma'am," he said. "Cash," she said. He started the engine. He rode down the drive and turned onto Route 7 and was gone around the curve, and for a moment Dorothy could hear the sound of him diminishing down the valley, and then that too was gone, and the evening was quiet. Owen came down from the porch step and stood beside her. He slipped his hand into hers. "Grandma Dot," he said. "Yes, Bug. Is it over?" She looked at the land, at the mountains going to silhouette in the last light, at the garden, at the house. "The hard part is over," she said. Owen thought about this. "What is the easy part?" "Living," she said. "Just living." He considered that with the seriousness it deserved. Then he said, "I am hungry." Dorothy squeezed his hand. "Come on then," she said. "Let us go inside." They went up the porch steps together. The door closed behind them. Through the kitchen window a light came on, warm and steady in the November dark, the way it had been lit on this piece of land for 50 years, the way it would be lit for 50 more. 2 weeks later, Judge Morrison held the custody hearing in her circuit court in Barberville, and it lasted less than 90 minutes. Warren did not appear. Tillman had submitted a written notice of withdrawal of the petition 4 days prior. Dorothy learned through Rebecca that Warren had checked himself into a residential treatment facility in Louisville, a 90-day program. She received this information carefully, the way she received most things she could not control. She acknowledged it, felt what she felt about it, which was complicated, and then she put it in its proper place and went on. Morrison confirmed Dorothy and Lily as joint guardians of Owen, with Lily's parental role expanding as she continued to stabilize her own life. The ruling was 8 pages and unambiguous. Dorothy read all 8 pages that evening, twice at the kitchen table. The Ridgeline investigation moved along its federal track, slow and thorough. Torres called Dorothy in December for a deposition date. Dorothy said she would be there and spent 3 evenings going back through her notebooks to prepare, because 40 years of nursing had taught her that testimony was only as good as the records behind it. Keller had suspended his duties pending investigation. Earl Boone's courthouse cousin reported that Keller had hired the most expensive defense attorney in the state and was saying nothing. Dorothy thought this was a reasonable choice on his part and expected it to cost him a great deal of money before it was finished. December brought the first real snow, 3 inches overnight, enough to transform the farm by morning. The fields and garden and lower pasture gone white and smooth, the mountains striped with snow on their north faces. Owen stood on the porch in his coat and boots and looked at it with the pure amazement of a child who has not yet lost the capacity to be astonished by snow. "It covered everything," he said. "It does that," Dorothy said. "The garden is under there." "Still there, though," she said. "It will come back in the spring, like it always does." Like it always does. Cash wrote her a letter in January, not a text, an actual letter, handwritten on plain paper in a neat, economical hand. He wrote that the Iron Vow Club had voted to establish a small fund for families in eastern Kentucky navigating what he called judicial land disputes, administered through Rebecca, who had already taken 2 cases. He wrote at the end, "I have been thinking about what you said, about using the bracelet as a reminder of what you can do for someone else. I keep it in my left pocket now, instead of the inside pocket, closer to hand. I notice it more there." Dorothy read the letter at the kitchen table on a January morning with her coffee, Owen eating breakfast across from her. She read it twice and folded it and put it in the kitchen drawer next to nothing, because she had burned the summons in the wood stove the week before. She had watched it curl and darken and reduce to ash, and she had felt nothing but the clean satisfaction of disposing of something that had served its purpose as an alarm and had no further use. She kept Cash's letter. Owen looked up from his eggs. "What is that?" "A letter from Cash." His face opened. "What does it say?" "It says he is helping more people." Owen nodded, satisfied. "When I grow up, I am going to help people too," he said. Dorothy looked at him, at those steady brown eyes, at the concentrated, matter-of-fact seriousness of a boy who had already decided something about himself. "I know you are," she said. Spring came with the particular determination of springs in the Kentucky mountains, not gradually, but all at once, the way the cold had come in November. A decisive shift that left the ground soft by morning, and the creek running full, and the first shoots of green visible on the lower slopes of the mountains before anyone was quite ready for them. Dorothy went to her garden in early April and found the crocuses, purple and white, exactly the same color they had always been pushing up through the last of the cold ground, at the edge of the garden, right where her mother had planted them 67 years ago. The same flowers, the same colors, the same small, bold announcement of continuation. Dorothy stood looking at them with her coffee cooling in her hands, the mountains bright in the early April morning, the oaks and hickories just beginning to show the pale green of new leaves. She stood for a long time. She thought about the shape that things had taken, about how a court document could arrive and set events in motion that ended with 49 people eating chili in a lower field, about how a decision made in 3 seconds on a dark road 20 years ago had created a chain that stretched all the way to a federal investigation and a fund for families in land disputes, about how these things work not through any grand rearrangement, but through the accumulation of small choices. She had stopped for Cash Donovan because she could not stop. Cash had built something of his life because someone stopped for him. He had called Rebecca because Dorothy had kept him breathing. Rebecca had taken the case because Cash had called. Cross had come forward because the cost of silence had gotten too high. Morrison had ruled quickly because the evidence was clear. None of these were grand gestures. All of them were someone doing the thing that was in front of them. Dorothy had always believed this, that the world was mostly made by ordinary people doing ordinary things with consistency and care. She had believed it in the emergency room when she was the nurse who stayed until the shift ended. She had believed it when Ray was dying. She believed it now. She went inside and got Owen up and made breakfast and drove him to school and came back to the quiet farm. She put on her work coat and her boots and went out into the April morning to turn the first row of the garden because the season was beginning, and the work was there, and the work was good work. The crocuses stood at the edge of the garden while she worked, purple and white, small and definite, the exact same color they had always been. On the Route 7 heading north, moving through the spring mountains toward wherever he was going next, Cash Donovan felt the bracelet in his left pocket where he kept it now. He thought about Dorothy Briggs on her porch with her coffee, looking at him with those eyes that had seen everything, and had decided 20 years ago that a young man in a ditch was worth stopping for. He thought about the 49 who had voted unanimously and stood in the cold in Harlan County and had done it not for thanks, but because it was right. He thought about Owens drawing the house, the mountains, the 2 motorcycles at the end of the drive, the small figures at the courthouse with their arms raised. He thought about what Dorothy had said when she closed his fingers back around the bracelet, that it belonged with him now, not as payment for anything, but as a way of carrying forward what had been given. He rode. The spring mountains moved past him, green and enormous and very old. The road was empty, and the air was clean and cold, and smelled like creek water and new leaves, and the particular scent of Kentucky in the first weeks of warmth. Back on the rise above the creek in Harlan County, Dorothy Briggs turned the last row of the morning and straightened and looked at the garden and the mountains and the crocuses at the edge of it. She looked at the farmhouse behind her white clapboard tin roof, the porch with its 2 rocking chairs, the kitchen window with the light on, because it was still early. 40 acres, hers, all of it. She had been afraid of losing it. She had not lost it. She had stood in front of what was coming and had not moved. And she had found along the way that she was not standing alone, that a young man she had pulled from a ditch 20 years ago had spent those years becoming someone worth the pulling, and that the debt between them was not really a debt at all, but something more like a conversation that had taken 2 decades to finish. She picked up her tools and walked back to the house because there was more work to do, and the work was not going to do itself. Owen came home from school that afternoon on the bus, jumping down from the bottom step the way he always did, 2 feet at once, landing with a thump on the gravel. He came up the porch steps and dropped his backpack inside the door and went directly to the kitchen window and looked at the garden. "The crocuses are still there," he said. "They will be for a few more weeks," Dorothy said. "Then they go back underground for next year." Owen looked at the garden for a moment with the expression of a boy doing calculations about time. "Will you teach me to garden this summer?" he asked. Dorothy looked at him, at the steady brown eyes, at the concentrated intent of a child who had decided something. "Yes," she said, "I will teach you." Owen nodded, satisfied. He went to get his after-school snack. Dorothy watched him go and then turned back to the kitchen window. The garden, the mountains, the farm in the April afternoon, the light going golden the way it did in the hours before evening. She put the kettle on. The crocuses would go back in a few weeks. The garden would come fully alive through May and June and July. Owen would learn the rose would get dirt on his hands and under his fingernails, and in his sneakers would complain about the weeding on days when he would rather be doing something else, and then do the weeding because that was what you did. The federal case would move through its slow federal process and eventually arrive somewhere. The families Rebecca was representing would have their reckoning, whatever form that took. Cash would ride wherever he rode and keep the bracelet in his left pocket and do whatever the next version of the right thing was when it appeared in front of him. Dorothy Briggs would be here, on this land, with her garden and her kettle and her notebook and the 2 rocking chairs on the porch that had been there so long they had sunk permanent grooves in the floorboards. Doing the next thing and the thing after that with the same attention she had brought to all of it for 67 years. Because that was how you kept something, not with grand gestures, but with the 10,000 small decisions that added up over time to a life. The kettle sang. The mountains held their ancient shape against the spring sky. The creek made its small sound below the ridge. The kitchen was warm. She poured her tea. She sat down at the table. She was Dorothy Briggs. This was her land. She intended to stay. She thought often in those spring months about the other families. The ones Rebecca had identified who had come before her, who had lost their land before anyone was watching closely enough, before the pattern had been named and documented and placed in front of a federal agent who recognized it. She thought about them with a specific kind of weight, not guilt exactly, because she could not have stopped what happened to them. She had been living her own life and was not aware of the machinery until it turned toward her. But the weight of knowing was real, and she carried it. She asked Rebecca in one of their April calls how many families Ridgeline had affected in total. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "In Harlan County alone, we have identified 7, she said. In the broader eastern Kentucky region across 3 counties, possibly 20 or more. Some of them do not know yet what was done to them. They thought they sold at market value. They thought the legal proceedings against them were legitimate. They thought they had simply been unlucky." "They were not unlucky," Dorothy said. "No," Rebecca said. "They were not." Dorothy sat with that. With the accumulated loss of it, the 40 acres here, and the 30 acres there, and the 60 acres somewhere else, people who had built what her father built, and then had it taken through a mechanism they didn't understand until it was over, and sometimes didn't understand even then. "Is there anything I can do?" Dorothy said. "Yes, actually. I want to use your case as a template. The documentation, the methodology, the way the evidence was assembled. With your permission, I would like to share it with lawyers representing other families. Not personally identifying, just the structure." "Of course," Dorothy said. "And I would speak with the families themselves if that would help. Some of them may be in a place where they feel they failed." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "That would matter more than you know," she said. 2 women called in April and May, both older, both from counties east of Harlan. Dorothy talked to each of them for over an hour. She told them what had happened to her, clearly and in order. She told them what had been done to them was not their failure. It was Keller's crime and Ridgeline's crime, and it was being prosecuted. She could not give them their land back, but she could give them the truth of what had happened, and the knowledge that it was being fought, and the sound of a voice that had stood on the same ground and come through it. She thought that mattered. Not by itself, not enough, but as part of the larger accumulation of people choosing to show up. Rebecca called in late May with an update on the federal case. Keller had agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for considerations Torres was not at liberty to specify, which Dorothy understood to mean he had traded what he knew about Ridgeline's structure and operations for a reduced outcome. It was not justice in any pure form. It was the kind of justice available in the real world, which was incomplete and uneven, and still meaningfully better than nothing. Dorothy received this with the same practical acceptance she brought to imperfect outcomes in every other domain of her life. The Ridgeline extraction permit remained suspended. The two civil suits Rebecca was handling were moving slowly through their processes as civil suits did. Dorothy had given her deposition in January and told the truth as clearly as she knew how to tell it, and she had put the matter in the hands of people whose job it was to do what came next. She tended her garden. The spring moved into summer, and the garden came fully alive. The tomatoes, the beans, the squash, the rows of greens that came up fast in June and needed picking every few days or they went tough. Dorothy worked it in the evenings after Owen was home from school, and sometimes Owen worked with her, and she taught him the things her mother had taught her: which plants went where, how to read the soil, when the water was needed, and when you were better off waiting. He was a good student. He had patience for it, which surprised some people, and not Dorothy at all. He watched things carefully and remembered what he was told, and had an instinct for what a plant needed, which was the instinct you either had or you didn't. One evening in late June, he was on his knees beside the tomato row with his small hands in the warm dirt, and he asked without looking up whether his father had ever worked in this garden. When he was your age, Dorothy said, he liked the beans, but not anymore. He grew up and went other ways. She kept her voice level. People do that sometimes. Will he come back? Dorothy looked at the garden, at the mountains beyond it going to gold in the long summer evening. I don't know, she said. I hope he gets better. I hope he comes back when he is better. But right now you have me and your mother and the farm. That is a lot. Owen nodded slowly. Then he went back to his weeding with the focused seriousness of a boy who had received a true answer and accepted it without requiring more. Dorothy kept working. The beans were coming up well. The evening birds started their last calling in the trees along the creek. The mountains held their green, and the farmhouse lights began to come on behind her as the dusk came in. She thought about what Cash had said in his letter about keeping the bracelet in his left pocket where he noticed it more. She thought about the families on the phone in April and May, the particular quality of their voices, when they understood that what had happened to them had happened to others and was being fought, and that they were not invisible. She thought about Owen's question, which would come back in different forms as he got older, and which she would answer each time as honestly as she could, because that was what you owed a child who asked real questions. She stood up and stretched her back, because 67 years old was 67 years old, and looked at the garden in the late evening light. The rows straight, the plants full, the cages holding everything up the way cages were supposed to. The work of a season, visible and real. She carried her tools back to the shed. She washed her hands at the outdoor spigot, the water cold from the well. She went inside where Owen was already at the kitchen table with his drawing pad, working on something with the same concentrated seriousness he always brought to drawing. She started dinner. Rice and pork chops and the beans she had pulled yesterday from the garden, the first of the season. She cooked them with onion and a little smoked salt, the way her mother had cooked them. "What are you drawing?" she asked Owen. Owen looked at his paper for a moment. "A map," he said, "of the farm." He held it up so she could see the house in the center, the garden behind it marked with small, careful squares for each row, the creek at the bottom of the picture, the mountains rising up around everything in curved pencil lines that were more accurate than she would have expected from a first grader. "You included the creek," she said. "It is part of the farm," he said, as if this were obvious. Dorothy looked at his map. At the small, careful house in the center of it, surrounded by garden and creek and mountains. At the detail of it, the porch with two shapes she recognized as the rocking chairs, the shed in the back corner, the sugar maple in the lower field where the tables had been set up for the gathering. He had drawn the sugar maple. "You remember the gathering," she said. "I remember everything," Owen said, with the simple confidence of a child who had not yet been told that memory was fallible. He went back to his drawing. Dorothy turned back to the stove. The pork chops were sizzling. The beans were fragrant on the back burner. Through the kitchen window, the last of the June evening was visible above the ridge. A deep, clear blue, going to dark at the top, the mountains in silhouette below it. She set the table. She called Owen. They ate together in the kitchen, the ordinary evening sounds of the house around them, the clock ticking and the refrigerator humming, and somewhere outside the creek making its small, steady sound below the ridge. After dinner, Owen helped carry the dishes to the sink, and then went to finish his map. And Dorothy washed up and dried and put everything away, and then stood at the kitchen window for a moment in the clean quiet of the finished evening. The farmhouse light was on. The garden was full. Owen was at the table. 40 acres. Hers. All of it. Her father's money. Her mother's crocuses. Ray's handwriting in the margins of the soil test results. 9 years of her own widowhood, careful and determined. 14 months of Owen at the end of the hall. And through it all, the particular long, invisible thread that connected a summer night on Route 7 to a gray November morning in a circuit court in Barberville, to a November afternoon with 49 motorcycles in the lower field, to this kitchen on a June evening, the accumulated weight of people making choices, showing up, doing the thing that was in front of them. She thought about Cash riding somewhere in the mountains, with the bracelet in his left pocket where he noticed it more. She thought about the two women on the phone in April and May, their voices finding something to hold on to. She thought about Rebecca Gallagher building the next case with the same methodical persistence. She thought about Finn Roth touching his ball cap at her from the shoulder of Route 7. She thought about her father loading coal for 7 years. She thought about Owen at the kitchen table, drawing his map of the farm with the creek included because the creek was part of it. She turned out the kitchen light and went to stand in Owen's doorway the way she stood in it every night, just for a moment, listening to the small sounds of a child working the scratch of the pencil, the slight rustle of paper, the particular quality of a room that held someone who was safe. He looked up and saw her and gave her the look that was Ray's look, steady and serious and entirely his own. "Getting late," she said. "Almost done," he said. She waited. In a few minutes, he capped his pencils and set the drawing on the nightstand and got into bed. She turned off the light and he settled into the dark with the easy depth of a child who has been tired by the right things. "Good night, Grandma Dot," he said. "Good night, Bug." She closed the door most of the way he liked it, and stood in the hall for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and locked the door, because locking the door was what you did, and checked the windows and turned out the last light. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and breathed in the smell of the house wood and old plaster and something that was only itself the accumulated presence of decades of living, and she felt the full, settled weight of where she was. Not the weight of a burden, the weight of a thing that had roots, the weight of something real. She had been afraid of losing this. She had not lost it. She had stood in front of what was coming and had not moved, and had found, as she had found many times before, in many other circumstances, that the not moving was the thing that the willingness to plant your feet and take the next step, and the next, was what it came down to. Not courage in any dramatic sense, but the ordinary daily refusal to give up. She closed her eyes. Outside, the mountains were dark and enormous and covered with stars. The creek made its sound. The garden slept. The crocuses were long gone back into the ground for the year, waiting without urgency for the next spring, and the spring after that, and the 40 springs still to come, because that was what they did. And they had been doing it for 67 years, and would go on doing it long after. Dorothy Briggs was home. She was going to stay. July brought heat and the particular abundance of a Kentucky garden at its peak, and Dorothy moved through it with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had been doing this all her life. She was in the garden before the heat came up each morning before 7, working the rows in the blue early light, while the birds were loud and the air still carried the cool of the night. She pulled weeds and checked for the squash vine borer that always came in July, and watched the tomatoes for blossom and rot, the particular failures of a garden being things she had learned to anticipate and correct before they spread. Owen came to the garden on the mornings he didn't have summer camp in his boots, in his old work shirt that had been Ray's grandchild's shirt decades ago and was now his by virtue of being the right size. And Dorothy showed him things, and he watched and remembered. He learned the difference between a weed and a volunteer. The tomato seedlings that sometimes came up from last year's compost, small and earnest and out of place, which you could transplant if you wanted or pull if you didn't. He learned how to feel the soil for moisture, pressing 2 fingers down to the second knuckle because the surface could lie to you about what was underneath. He learned to look at a tomato plant from below for the early signs of the hornworm before it got big enough to do serious damage. He was a serious student. He asked precise questions and remembered the answers. By late July, he was working a short section of the bean row himself, and Dorothy watched him from the tomato end with the quiet satisfaction of a woman passing something forward. Cash sent a postcard in July, a mountain scene from somewhere in Colorado. On the back, in his neat, economical hand, 3 more families connected with Rebecca this month. The bracelet is in the left pocket. He signed it with his name and nothing else. Dorothy propped the postcard against the kitchen window and left it there. August was the canning month. Dorothy had put up preserves every August since she was 22 years old, the year she and Ray had their first full garden, and she did not intend to stop now. She canned tomatoes and green beans and dill pickles and bread and butter pickles, and the wild blackberry jam that required 2 trips to the bottom field where the blackberries grew thick along the old fence line. Owen came on the second blackberry trip and came back with purple-stained hands and mouth, which Dorothy had expected, and with 2 full-gallon buckets, which she had not entirely expected, but which was consistent with who he was. She taught him how the canner worked, the pressure, the timing, the particular urgency of lids that needed to seal. She taught him the sound a sealed jar made against the tap of a spoon, the clear note that meant success. He tested every jar with the serious focus of a child performing a critical function, tapping each lid and listening and announcing sealed or not sealed, as if issuing a verdict. One evening in late August, as they were finishing the last of the tomatoes, Owen asked her without preamble whether she had been afraid. When she asked, though, she knew when. When the man came, when they took me to the place, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at the jars lined up on the counter cooling. She had been afraid, yes. She had allowed herself 1 minute of fear on the shoulder of Route 7, the day they took Owen, and then she had put it in its proper place and driven. Yes, she said, I was afraid. Not of Warren or Keller or any of them. I was afraid of losing you. That is a different kind of afraid. Owen thought about this. Were you afraid when you were a nurse? Sometimes, she said. When someone was very sick and I was not sure what to do. But mostly when you are a nurse, you do not have time to be afraid. You just do the next thing. Is that what you did? Yes. Owen looked at the jars. And it worked. It worked, she confirmed. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to labeling the jars, pressing each paper label straight with the flat of his thumb. Dorothy watched him and thought about what it meant to give a child an honest answer to a real question, and about the particular obligation of truth that went with raising someone to be someone. She thought about what she would tell him someday about Warren. Not yet. He was 6, almost 7. There would be time. The truth about Warren was not simple and would not fit in an 8-year-old's understanding, and she was not going to press it in before its time. But she had already decided that she would not simplify it either, not when the time came, because Owen deserved the full truth about his family, the same way he deserved the full truth about anything he asked about directly, and he would ask eventually, and she would tell him. Warren had not called, had not written. The treatment program in Louisville was 90 days. He had presumably finished it in late spring. Whether he had gone somewhere else after, or come back to Harlan, or gone somewhere she didn't know, she had heard nothing. She had not called him. She had left the door at a specific kind of not closed, which was different from open, available, if he did the work for a different conversation at a different time. She was not going to close it entirely. She was not going to pretend it was fully open either. She was 67 years old, and she had long since made peace with the distances between what you hope for someone and what they were able to give you, and with the difference between love and enabling, and with the fact that you could do both at once, love someone and also not let them damage you. It was not a comfortable place to stand. It was real. September brought school starting again, and Owen going back to Ridgewood Elementary with the focused readiness of a child who liked school and wanted to get back to it. He was in second grade now. His teacher that year was a young woman named Mrs. Flores, who called Dorothy the second week to say that Owen had already volunteered to help a new student who did not speak much English yet, sitting with him at lunch and drawing pictures to explain things, which was entirely consistent with who he was, and which made Dorothy drive home afterward, smiling at the road. She and Lily talked more easily in the fall than they had the year before, the easiness that came from the crisis being behind them, and from both of them having learned in its passage something about what the other was made of. Lily had her own apartment still, but came to the farm 2 or 3 times a week for dinner, for the weekends, for no particular reason except that she wanted to. Dorothy enjoyed her company. She was direct and honest, and had a good sense of humor that the terrible years with Warren had not managed to extinguish, which said something about her fundamental nature. Cash called in October on a Sunday afternoon, while Dorothy was on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fall colors come in on the lower slopes. "I am going to be in Harlan in 2 weeks," he said, passing through. "Just me." "Come for dinner," Dorothy said. He came on a Tuesday on the black bike with the red stripe, and Dorothy made pot roast and biscuits and apple cake. Lily was there. Owen was there. The 4 of them ate at the kitchen table, and the conversation was easy in the way that things became easy when people had been through something together. Owen gave Cash a tour of the garden after dinner, walking him through the rows in the October dusk and explaining where everything had been and what was coming next year. Cash listened with his hands in his jacket pockets and asked questions that were genuine about the tomato yield, about the bean row, about why the crocuses came up in the particular corner of the garden they came up in. "Because my great-grandmother planted them there," Owen said. "And then Grandma Dot's mother took care of them, and then Grandma Dot takes care of them, and then someday I will." Cash looked at Owen for a moment. Then he looked at Dorothy, who was standing at the garden's edge watching them. "Is that right?" Cash said to her. "That is right," Dorothy said. They stood in the October garden in the early dark, the 3 of them, while the mountains rose up around the farm in their fall colors, and the creek made its sound below the ridge. Cash left after the cake. He stood by his bike for a moment before getting on. He looked at the farmhouse, at the light in the kitchen window, at the porch with its 2 rocking chairs. "This is a good place," he said. "Yes," Dorothy said. "It is." He pulled the bracelet from his left pocket and held it for a moment in his palm, looking at it in the porch light. Then he put it back. Still noticing it, he said. "Good," she said. He swung onto the bike and started the engine. He looked at her once more. Then he rode down the drive and turned onto Route 7 and was gone around the curve, and Dorothy stood on the porch and listened until the sound of the engine had faded into the mountains, and the evening was quiet. She went inside. Owen was at the kitchen table with his drawing pad. Lily was washing the dinner dishes and talking about something from work, and Dorothy picked up the dish towel and listened and dried. The kitchen was warm. The clock on the wall ticked. Through the window, the mountains were dark shapes against the stars. Tomorrow, she would get Owen to school and come back and finish putting the garden to bed for winter, pulling the last of the dead stalks and laying the beds with the last of the compost from the pile. She would check the fence before the freeze. She would call Rebecca about the deposition schedule. She would start the long process of ordering seeds for the spring because it was never too early and the best varieties sold out. There was always more work, That was not a complaint. That was the point. She dried the last dish and put it away and said goodnight to Lily and stood in Owen's doorway while he finished what he was drawing and then turned out his light. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and breathed in the smell of the house and listened to the sound of the place that had held her family for 67 years and would hold them for 60 more. The tin roof, the creek, the October wind moving through the sugar maple in the lower field. She closed her eyes. She was Dorothy Briggs. This was her land. She had kept it. She would keep it. That was what you did with something worth keeping. You showed up for it every day. You did the work. You did not let the people who wanted to take it convince you that you did not have the right to keep fighting for it. She had always known this. She had known it long before any of this, from her father loading coal for 7 years so he could buy something real, from her mother tending the crocuses in the corner of the garden, from Ray working the fields with a bad back because the work was his, and the land was his, and the love of it was his. She had known it from 40 years of nursing, from the particular stubbornness of staying with someone through the night, even when the night was long. Some things were worth the trouble. This was worth the trouble. She slept. The October anniversary of it, a year on from when she had first heard the engine of Cash's column coming around the curve on Route 7, from the blown tire and the empty shoulder and the mountain morning, came without fanfare. Dorothy noted it privately. She was not a woman who needed ceremony for her own recognition of things. She stood at the kitchen window that morning with her coffee and looked at the land and thought about the year, the shape of it. She had been afraid and had not shown it, and had worked the problem methodically with the people who came to work it with her, and had gotten Owen back and kept the land. That was the short version. The long version was everything she had written in the 3 notebooks that now sat on the shelf above the kitchen table, and the depositions on file in Lexington, and the 2 civil cases Rebecca was running, and the small fund Cash had set up that had now connected 6 families with legal advocates in the past year. The long version was Owen at Ridgewood Elementary, helping a child who didn't speak English yet by drawing pictures. The long version was Lily's yellow apartment down the hill, and the ease between them now, and the way Lily could say Ray's name at the dinner table without either of them flinching. She had sent Cash a card for the anniversary. Not a sentimental one. She had looked at the cards in the rack at the drugstore and found them all too much of something, and had bought a plain one with a picture of mountains on the front, which was honest. She had written inside, 1 year, the garden came back like it always does. Thank you for everything you were part of this year. She had signed it with her name and the name of the farm, which was what she had always called it in her own head, the Briggs place on the creek. He sent a postcard back inside of a week. The same mountains from the front of her card, which she supposed meant he had bought the same card somewhere, or one like it. He wrote, 6 families and counting. The bracelet is still in the left pocket. Some things are worth noticing every day. He signed it, Cash. She propped the postcard next to the July one on the kitchen window ledge. 2 mountains. She thought about getting a small board to pin them to a way of keeping them properly. She thought she might do that. Rebecca called in November with the outcome of the federal case against Keller. He had pleaded guilty to 3 counts of honest services fraud and 1 count of conspiracy in connection with Ridgeline Resource Partners. His sentence was 5 years with the prospect of reduction for the cooperation he had provided, which had led to charges against 3 Ridgeline executives and an ongoing investigation into the parent company. It was not everything. It was real. Dorothy received this on a Tuesday morning while she was at the kitchen table doing the winter seed order. She set down her pencil and listened to Rebecca's methodical account of the sentence and the connected charges and the ongoing investigation. When Rebecca finished, Dorothy said, "What about the families who lost their land? 2 of the 7 in Harlan County have civil suits pending. Both have solid grounds based on what came out in the federal case. I think they will settle. The others, it is more complicated. I am still working on it. Is there something I can do?" "You have done everything you could do," Rebecca said. "You built the case that made the federal case possible. You gave those families your time and your story. She paused. But if you are asking whether there is still work, there is always still work. There is always another family and another Floyd Keller in another county. That does not change. I know, Dorothy said. She did know. She had always known. That was not a reason to stop. It was not even a reason to feel defeated. It was just the actual shape of the world, which required continuous attention rather than a single, decisive battle. She said goodbye to Rebecca and went back to the seed order. She was trying a different tomato variety this year, a paste tomato that she had read was good for canning, fuller flavored than what she had been growing. She was adding a row of pole beans that Owen had specifically requested because he had decided that pole beans were his favorite thing from the garden after eating them straight off the vine in July when she wasn't watching. She wrote down the pole beans. She circled them twice because they were important to someone. Owen came home that afternoon to find her at the kitchen table with the seed catalogs spread around her, and he sat down across from her without being invited and looked at the catalogs with the focused interest of a child who had been told the garden was partly his. "Can I pick some things?" he asked. She pushed the bean catalog across the table. "These are the beans," she said. "You pick the pole variety, and I will go with whatever you choose." He bent over the catalog. His dark head was very close to the page. He turned it slowly, reading the descriptions with the particular care of a child who was still getting through longer words but was not going to ask for help unless he absolutely had to. "This one," he said finally. He pointed to a variety called Kentucky Wonder, which was an old variety one Dorothy had grown before and which she would have chosen herself. He had picked it because the description said the pods were long and the plants were vigorous, and because he had read the word vigorous and liked it. "Good choice," she said. He nodded with quiet satisfaction and slid the catalog back across the table. That evening, she made soup from the last of the fall squash, thick and orange and fragrant with ginger and a little cream, and she and Owen ate it at the kitchen table by the light of the lamp, while the November dark pressed against the windows and the wind moved through the sugar maple in the lower field. "Tell me something," Owen said. "About what?" "About before. About when you were little." Dorothy ate her soup for a moment and thought about this. She was not a woman who lived much in the past, but she understood the particular hunger of children for the before time, for the evidence that the people they loved had once been their own age and had stood in this kitchen and looked out these windows. "When I was about your age," she said, maybe a little older, "my father took me up to the top of the North Ridge. He had found a bee tree, a hollow tree where a swarm had taken up residence. He took a piece of honeycomb out of it and brought it down in a bucket, and we ate it at this table right here, with biscuits he had made that morning. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. It tasted like the mountain, like the particular wildflowers that grew up there, bergamot and goldenrod, and something I never identified." Owen was listening with both hands flat on the table. "Is the tree still there?" he asked. "I don't know," Dorothy said. "It was a long time ago, and trees die. But the bees come back. There are still bees up there. I see them in the summer." Owen thought about this. "Can we go up there sometime?" "In the spring," Dorothy said, "when it is warm enough to climb. And look for the tree, and look for the tree." She looked at him. "And if the tree is there and the bees are there, maybe we will be lucky." Owen smiled a sudden full smile, the kind he produced rarely, and therefore all the more powerfully. "Okay," he said, and he went back to his soup. She looked at him across the table. 6 years old, nearly 7, Ray's eyes steady and brown, looking at the world with the same trust that the world would reveal itself if you paid enough attention. She thought about the ridge above the farm, the bee tree she had not seen in 50 years, the particular wildflower honey that had tasted like the mountain itself. She thought about her father's hand on her shoulder at the kitchen table, and the sound of his voice, which had been low and sure, and which she could still hear clearly if she tried. She thought about what she was building here, season by season, dinner by dinner, morning after morning in the garden. She thought about Owen learning to feel the soil for moisture, pressing 2 fingers in to the second knuckle, learning the thing her mother had taught her, and her mother had learned from her own mother on back through the years. She thought about the bee tree on the ridge and the spring coming, and the climb up through the woods in the new leaf light, looking for a hollow in an old tree with a sound of wings inside it. Whether the tree was still there did not matter as much as the going to look. Whether they found honey did not matter as much as the two of them climbing the ridge together in the spring morning, the farm below them, the mountains all around. She would be 68 by then. She would still be able to climb a ridge. She intended to be climbing ridges for some time yet. She washed the soup bowls while Owen went to do his reading, the sound of his small voice coming through the wall as he read to himself, sounding out the longer words with the careful patience he brought to things that required patience. She dried and put the bowls away and wiped the counter and hung up the dish towel. She went to stand in his doorway. He was on his bed with the book propped against his knees, his lips moving slightly, his brow slightly furrowed over a word. He looked up. "What is adamant?" he asked. "It means you are absolutely certain about something, and nothing is going to change your mind," Dorothy said. He thought about this. "Like you," he said. "Like me," she agreed. He nodded and went back to the book. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer in the warm light of his room, listening to the sound of his reading and the sound of the wind outside and the sound of the house holding them both. Then she went to bed. The mountains were still in the November dark. The farm was quiet. The kitchen window light was off, and the porch light was on, the way she kept it every night, a steady, small light at the front corner of the house, visible from the road. 40 acres, the Briggs place on the creek, hers. She had kept it. She would keep it. That was what you did. The second October settled over the farm with the same quality as the first had, the mountains going to color the mornings. Sharp, the particular blue of the fall sky that Dorothy had looked at all her life and had not found a comparison for the color that was only itself. She put the garden to bed with Owen's help. Now the two of them working the rows together on a Saturday morning, pulling the dead stalks and turning in the last of the compost. Owen's small hands in the cold dirt, moving with the sureness of a second season. "You remember what to do," Dorothy said. She was not asking. "I remember everything Owen said. He said it the same way he had the year before, the same simple confidence, and she believed him just as completely now as she had then." They worked through the morning. By noon the garden was done, the beds cleared and covered, the cages stacked at the edge of the shed. The compost pile turned and ready for the winter. Owen sat on the garden fence in his muddy boots and ate the apple Dorothy had brought out for him, in the pocket of her coat, and she stood beside the garden and looked at it. It was a good garden. It had always been a good garden. It was going to be a good garden next year and the year after that. She thought about the people who had tried to take it, about the mechanism they had built, the years of patient, corrupt planning, the judge and the money and the son used as a tool and the child used as leverage, about how close it had come, about how many times in those 31 days she had lain awake, running the calculations and not been sure. She thought about what had stood between that mechanism and the thing it wanted. A man who drove past a stopped truck and then turned around. A lawyer who answered a phone call from someone she had never met. A deputy who came to a porch with his hat in his hands. A circuit judge who read her briefs and ruled on the evidence. 49 people who voted unanimously because it was right. And a woman who had planted her feet and refused to move. Owen finished his apple and jumped down from the fence and handed her the core because he knew she fed the apple cores to the chickens, because she had told him this once, and he had never forgotten. She put it in her pocket. "Ready to go in?" she asked. He looked at the garden one more time. Then he looked at the mountains above it, the oaks and maples gone to red and orange, and the particular yellow of a hickory in October. The same mountains that had been there since before any of this. "Almost," he said. He stood for a moment more looking at the mountains with the serious attention of a child who had not yet decided how many seconds a thing like this deserved. Then he turned. "Okay," he said. "Now I am ready." They walked back to the house together across the frost-hardened ground, past the place where the crocuses had been, and would be again through the kitchen door and into the warm. Dorothy hung up her coat. She washed her hands at the sink. She put the kettle on. She heard Owen in the hallway taking off his boots, the small thumps of each one, and then his feet on the floor in the direction of his room. The kitchen was warm. The clock ticked. The kettle was beginning its early sound. Through the window, the October mountains stood in their colors. She stood at the window for a moment, looking at it all. There was something she had understood this year in the long and complicated way you understood things that required living through them rather than being told. She had understood it before in pieces in the way you understood things you already believed before they were tested. But this year had given her the tested version, which was different and more solid. She had understood that the people who tried to take things counted on the fact that the people they were taking from would be alone. They counted on isolation, on the gap between what was being done and the capacity of a single person to resist it. That was the mechanism, not just the corruption or the false documents or the compliant deputy, but the isolation. The assumption that an old woman on 40 acres in eastern Kentucky did not have anyone standing with her. They had been wrong about that. Not because she had been lucky. She had been lucky in the way that you made your own luck, by being the kind of person who stopped for a man in a ditch, and by building over a lifetime the reputation of someone who could be counted on, and by writing things down, and by asking for help when she needed it, rather than insisting on carrying everything herself. She had been lucky in Cash Donovan, who had turned out to be worth pulling from a ditch. She had been lucky in Rebecca Gallagher, who had been watching Keller for 3 years and needed one more case to make it complete. She had been lucky in the particular character of the Iron Vow chapter, which had voted unanimously because Bobby Carver had stood up and made the case that it was right. But luck did not come from nowhere. Luck came from the accumulation of the small things done consistently over time. From stopping when you could stop, from writing things down, from treating people the way they deserved to be treated on the worst days of their lives. She had done those things for 40 years, and when the time came, they had been there. She turned from the window. The kettle was singing. She made her tea and sat down at the kitchen table and pulled the seed catalogs toward her because it was October and next year's garden was already something to begin thinking about, and the Kentucky Wonders would need to be ordered before the 1st of December to be sure of getting them. She opened the catalog. She found the beans. She put her finger on the page. Next year, she thought, the pole beans in the row Owen had worked this year, tall and vigorous, the pods long in July, the two of them eating them straight off the vine when she was not watching. The bee tree on the north ridge, the spring climb through the new leaf woods, the sound of wings inside the hollow, if the bees were still there. The crocuses coming back in April like they always did. Like they always did. She picked up her pencil and circled the beans. December came on, cold and certain. Snow in the first week, real snow this time, 6 inches overnight, that made the farm unrecognizable in the morning, all its landmarks gone under white, and only the general shapes remaining, the mountains and the house, and the outline of the garden fence. Dorothy was up before it stopped falling and stood on the porch in her wool coat and watched the last of it come down in the dark. The flakes, large and quiet, the farm utterly still under the accumulating white. Owen found her there when he came down at 6:30. He stood beside her in his coat and boots, and they both looked at the snow for a moment without speaking. Everything is covered, Owen said. It will melt, Dorothy said. In a week, maybe 2, but not today. Not today. He looked at the garden, then at the mountains, the peaks white above the tree line, and the lower slopes still dark beneath her snow. He had the expression she had come to associate with him at his most thoughtful, the expression that asked a real question before the question was said out loud. Grandma Dot, he said, do you think my dad is okay? She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the snow. She had heard through Lily through the thin thread of information that sometimes found its way to her that Warren was in Lexington. Working a job Lily had heard, living in a sober house, no other details. I think he is trying to be okay, Dorothy said. That is the best I can tell you right now. Owen considered this. Is trying enough? Dorothy looked at her grandson, at the steady brown eyes in the early morning light, looking at her directly, asking the real question. Sometimes, she said, Sometimes trying is everything, and sometimes it is not enough by itself. And the only way you find out which is to keep watching. She paused. What I know is that you are loved. By me, by your mother, by people you do not even know who think you are worth looking out for. Whatever else is uncertain, that is not. Owen stood with this for a moment. Then he said, like Cash and the others. Like Cash and the others, he nodded. He put his hand in hers, the small, cold fingers finding her larger hand. They stood on the porch in the early December snow and looked at the white farm in the gray morning light, the mountains rising up behind it, old and enormous and unchanged. The world was complicated. It had always been complicated. It would go on being complicated long after either of them was around to navigate it. That was not a reason to be afraid of it. It was a reason to pay attention, to do the work, to plant the things that came back, to pass the knowledge forward to the person standing beside you in their small boots in the snow. Let's go in and make breakfast, Dorothy said. Can we have biscuits? We can have biscuits. He went inside ahead of her. She stood on the porch for one more moment looking at the snow. She thought about Lily down the hill in the yellow apartment, probably looking at the same snow right now. She thought about Rebecca in Lexington, working on the next case. She thought about Cash somewhere with the bracelet in his left pocket, noticing it when he needed to. She thought about two older women in counties east of Harlan who had heard her voice on the phone in April and found something to hold on to. She thought about her father walking the fence line of the first 20 acres the day he finished paying for it all, 7 years of coal money finally converted into real ground. She thought about her mother in this kitchen, in the mornings, the sound of her moving around in the dark before light, the smell of coffee and wood smoke. She thought about Ray in the east-facing bedroom, the morning light coming through the curtains. She thought about Owen at the kitchen table, circling the bean variety in the catalog, with the authority of a child who had made a real decision. She went inside. She closed the door against the cold. She tied on her apron and got out the flour. The biscuits took 20 minutes. While they were in the oven, Owen set the table the way she had taught him. Plates to the right of center, glasses above the knife, napkins folded once and placed on the left. He was precise about it. He had decided that setting the table correctly was a thing worth doing correctly, which was who he was. They ate the biscuits with butter and the blackberry jam she had put up in August, Owen's favorite, the one that tasted like the bottom field in high summer. The snow was still on the farm outside the window. The mountains were white and enormous. After breakfast, she drove Owen to school on the plowed roads and came back to the farm and got out the tractor and moved the snow from the drive and the path to the shed and the path to the chicken house, because life went on through snow as through everything, and the chickens needed their morning feeding. She worked through the morning in the cold, her breath clouding in the air, the farm white and quiet around her. She checked the pipes, fine, well-wrapped as they had always been since Ray's renovation, and the fence where the snow might have come down hard on an already loose post. One post in the north section that she had known was marginal. She made a note to fix it when the ground thawed. By noon, the sky had cleared. The sun came out cold and brilliant, and the snow on the farm began to sparkle, each crystal catching the light, the mountains glittering above the white valley. It was very beautiful. Dorothy stood in the drive and looked at it and allowed herself to be affected by it, because that was another discipline she had learned over a long life. To stop and let the beautiful things be beautiful, to not walk past them on the way to the next task. She stood for 2 full minutes. Then she went inside and had her lunch and went back to work. She had the winter seed order to finish. She had the phone call to Rebecca about the deposition timeline. She had the fence post in the north section to get to in the spring. She had Owen's parent-teacher conference the following week. There was always more. That had been true for 67 years and would go on being true, and she was grateful for it, because the alternative was the particular emptiness that came when there was nothing left that needed you. She sat down at the kitchen table with the catalogs. She found the Kentucky Wonders. She wrote down the number and the order quantity and the shipping date. She circled them again twice for Owen. Outside the window, the December snow sparkled on the farm. The mountains stood in their old places, white and cold and permanent, the way they had been standing since before her father was born. Since before any of this, since before the first person had looked at this particular valley and thought, this is a place to build something. It was a place to build something. She was still building it. She picked up the pencil and went on. January of the second year came in with a long, hard freeze that locked the ground and coated the creek in ice and made the windows run with condensation on the inside every morning. Dorothy checked the pipes every day as a matter of course. She kept the wood stove burning steadily through the nights, banking it before bed and stoking it first thing in the morning, the old discipline of cold weather housekeeping that her mother had taught her and that she had never stopped practicing even after the gas furnace was installed. Owen was in school and came home on the bus most days, jumping down from the bottom step the way he always did, 2 feet at once. He had gotten taller since the summer. He was going to be tall eventually. He had Ray's build as well as Ray's eyes. She found him one Saturday afternoon in the living room with the 3 notebooks from the kitchen shelf, all of them open on the coffee table. He was looking at them with the careful attention he brought to things that required attention. She stood in the doorway. "What are you reading?" He looked up. He did not look guilty about it because he was Owen and did not do things he thought were wrong. He was reading these because he had decided it was something he should read. "Is this about what happened?" he asked. "Some of it," Dorothy said. "Some of it is about other things." She crossed the living room and sat in the armchair across from the coffee table. "What made you want to look at them?" He thought about this. "I wanted to understand how you did it," he said. "How you knew what to do." Dorothy looked at the notebooks. The handwriting on the open page was hers, the careful block printing she used for things she wanted to be able to read back clearly, the dated entries, the names in times in exact words, the record of 31 days. "I did not always know what to do," she said. "I knew the next thing, and then after that, the next thing. It is not that different from the garden," she said. "You do what is in front of you, and you pay attention, and you write down what matters, and you do not give up." He looked at the notebook for a moment. "Are you going to give these to me?" "When the time is right," she said. "Yes." He closed the notebooks carefully and put them back in the stack. Then he got up and went to get his drawing things. And Dorothy sat in the armchair for a while and looked at the 3 notebooks on the coffee table. 67 years, a 40-acre farm, a dead husband who had loved it, a son who had gone wrong and was maybe slowly trying to go less wrong, a daughter-in-law who had found her way back to herself, a grandson with steady eyes who wanted to understand how things worked. And beyond the farm, the wider web of it, Rebecca building cases, cash with the bracelet in his left pocket, 6 families and counting, the particular quiet work of people who had decided that doing the right thing was not optional. She had not known when she was young that this was what a life accumulated into. She had known it was the work that mattered, and not the recognition had known it from nursing, from the 1,000 nights of the hard shift, when no one watched what you did, and it had to be done correctly anyway. But she had not known the full shape of it, the way that consistency over time built something that could hold weight when the weight came. The way that every small decision added to the next until you had built something you could stand on. She knew now. She got up and went to the kitchen and put on water for tea because it was Saturday and the afternoon was long and Owen would want hot chocolate if she was making something warm, which she would also make, and there was nothing that needed doing in the next hour that could not wait another 20 minutes while she sat at the kitchen table with her tea and her grandson and let the day be what it was. She made the tea. She made the hot chocolate. She set them on the table and called Owen, and he came and sat across from her and wrapped both hands around his mug, the way she always wrapped both hands around hers, which he had learned from watching her, and which she noticed every time. Outside the January windows, the farm was locked in its deep freeze, the ground hard and white, the creek ice quiet below the ridge, the mountains in their gray winter shapes. It was cold, and it was beautiful, and it was real, and it was hers. She drank her tea. Owen drank his hot chocolate. They sat together at the kitchen table in the warm house, while the cold January pressed against the windows, and neither of them said anything for a while, because neither of them needed to. The clock ticked. The stove was warm. Somewhere below the ridge, the creek was moving under its ice-cold and steady the way it had been moving since before any of them were here, and would go on moving long after. The farm was quiet. Dorothy Briggs was home. She was going to stay. February came and went, and March came with its mud and its false warmth, and its real warmth that arrived without announcement one morning and stayed. The ground softened. The creek came up with the melt. The lower field went from white to brown to the particular bright green of early spring grass. Dorothy watched all of this with the close attention she had given to every season of her 67 years on this land, because it was always the same, and it was never entirely the same, and both of those things were true at once and worth paying attention to. She turned the first row of the garden on a Saturday in late March, Owen beside her in his boots, both of them working in the bright, cold morning. The soil was ready, dark and loose, warming slowly, the earthworms moving near the surface, the way they moved when the ground was waking up. Owen found a large one and held it up to examine it with scientific interest before returning it carefully to the soil. "Good for the garden," he said. "Good for the garden," she confirmed. They worked through the morning. By noon, the first 3 rows were turned and ready, and they stood at the edge of the garden and looked at what they had done. "When do we plant?" Owen asked. "A few more weeks," Dorothy said. "We have to wait for the last frost." Owen looked at the mountains. "Is it hard to wait?" "Sometimes," Dorothy said, "but the waiting is part of it. You cannot rush the ground." He thought about this. "I think that is like a lot of things," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is like a lot of things." He went inside to wash his hands. Dorothy stayed for a moment at the edge of the garden, looking at the turned rows in the March sunlight. 40 years of this same garden, her mother's garden before it, the same ground worked every year, resting every winter, coming back every spring. She thought about the crocuses which had come up 10 days ago in the corner of the garden, right on time, exactly where they had always been. Purple and white, her mother's flowers, not replaced, not replanted, the same plants or the descendants of the same plants, persistent in the ground for 67 years. She had shown Owen when they came up. She had told him the story of them, her mother planting them the year Dorothy was born, in the corner of the garden, because that was where the light was best in April, and her mother had known exactly where the light would be. Owen had looked at the flowers for a long time. "Can I plant something that lasts that long?" he had asked. "Yes," she had said. "You can. We will find you something to plant this spring." She had been thinking about it since. What to give him? What would last? There were the perennial herbs, oregano, thyme, the others, but those were practical rather than specifically his. She had been thinking about the peonies that grew at the corner of the house, the old deep red ones that had been there since before she was born, that bloomed in June in a way that stopped you when you came around the corner and saw them. She could divide them in the fall and give him a piece to plant in the garden in his own corner, and they would come back every June, and they would be his. She would tell him about them this summer when they bloomed. She would let him see them first, and then she would offer. She went inside. She washed her hands. She started lunch because they had worked hard, and Owen would be hungry. Through the kitchen window, the March garden was brown and ready in the pale morning light, the mountains sharp and clear above it, the first real green of the season beginning to show on the lower slopes. It was going to be a good year, she could tell already. The soil was dark and loose, the kind of soil that had been taken care of, the kind that gave back what you put into it. She had put a great deal into it. It had given back more. Owen came into the kitchen in his clean hands and sat at the table and looked at the window. "The mountains are really green today," he said. "They are starting," Dorothy said. "By May, they will be the full green. June and July, they are the darkest. Then in the fall, they go to all the colors. And then winter, and they are brown," Owen said. "And then it starts again." "That is right." He watched the mountains through the window. "It is always starting again," he said. Dorothy looked at her grandson at the kitchen table in the March morning, with the light on his face in the mountains behind the window, in the garden outside ready for another season. Yes, she said, it is always starting again. She made lunch. She set the plates on the table. She sat across from Owen, and they ate together and talked about the garden and what they would plant and where the pole beans would go this year, and whether the tomatoes had done better in the east end of the garden or the west end last year. Owen having an opinion about this that was more precise than she might have expected from a 7-year-old, based on what he had observed and remembered. He remembered everything. He was going to be all right. They both were. She poured more water in his glass and passed the butter, and the conversation went on easy and ordinary and entirely real. The kitchen warm around them, the land outside ready to begin again, the mountains in their eternal positions, holding everything in place, the way they had always held it, the way they would go on holding it long after the two of them had sat at this table for the last time. And someone else had sat here after them, and the garden had gone on coming back in the spring without anyone who had known either of them alive to see it. But that was not today. Today was lunch at the kitchen table in March, with the mountains in the window and the garden ready, and Owen across from her with his grandfather's eyes, telling her about the pole beans and what he expected from them. Today was this. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.